Good evening. Good evening, dear friends. I'm Cynthia Hoven, and this is the 10th and last class in the current Studies in Anthroposophy series, which we have called An Anthroposophical Path to Inner Work. So tonight we will do a lot of culminating. We'll take a few final steps. And then I also did encourage you to bring any questions that you might have to this class this evening. So perhaps we'll end just a little bit early, and hopefully you have brought some comments and questions along with you. We've been on a long journey together, but you will remember that we begin each class with a little bit of eurythmy. In that, eurythmy enlivens us, our inner being, and it is a wonderful way to get ready for doing our inner work. So I invite you, in sitting or in standing, to take your place in your room. Center yourself. Know that you're a spiritual being inside your bodies, plural. Your astral, your etheric, and your physical body. Know that your heart inside your chest is more than just this beating mass in here. It is actually a spiritual organ whose lowest reflection is the physical body, but whose highest form is connected to the heart of the universe. And out of that, we know our opening exercise. Know that you can expand your energy through your attention to far beyond the walls of your room. Expand as far as the stars. And then allow yourself to be filled, nourished, rejuvenated by touching your microcosmic heart. And your heart, sparked by spirit, grows like an opening seed beyond your physical limits and brings new life in from the macrocosm, knowing itself, into your heart. Within my heart shines the light of the sun. Within my soul weaves the warmth of the world. I will breathe the light of the sun. I will feel the warmth of the world. Light of the sun, pour into me. Warmth of the world, flow through me. Focus on the gentle sensations in your body. Feel your breath quietly, peacefully, surging in your chest. Feel your upright stature between heaven and earth. And give thanks for the gift of life. And now in every one of these meetings, I've begun with a verse, sometimes the same verse, sometimes a different one. And in this one, our last meeting, I've chosen one more verse. It's a longer verse, but it brings in a picture of our thinking, feeling, and willing, our spiritual pursuits, and how through all of it, we need to be also firmly grounded citizens of our time. And so this verse, I said it's rather long, so I'll read it twice. Again, a verse by Rudolf Steiner. In your thinking, world thoughts are living. In your feeling, world all forces are weaving. In your willing, world beings are working. Lose yourself in worldwide thoughts. Feel yourself through world all forces. Create yourself from beings of will. Yet, do not linger in worlds afar, in dreamy play of thought. Begin in the vast reach of spirit and end in your own being's depths. There you will find the eternal aims of the gods, knowing yourself within yourself. Let's do that 2 more times. Let's see where this one goes. So it ends by saying, know yourself, find yourself in your own being. In your own being, you will find the eternal aims of the gods. What a beautiful sentence. We are the aims of the gods. But how do we feel that? When we know ourselves within ourselves. And here Rudolf Steiner is pointing to a meditative word that he often uses. He draws that backwards to the ancient Greek mysteries, but surely it goes even more further back, but he takes it back to the mysteries of Delphi. So let me say that again. The mystery words that he's pointing to are these words, simple words, "O human being, know yourself." And so he ends this line with saying, know yourself within yourself. What is that? That's not knowing your name. It's not just knowing that you're living your biography, married, unmarried, profession, whatever. It's knowing the core of your being, directly born out of spirit, living inside yourself. So again, he says, begin in the vast reaches of the spirit and end in your own being's depth. There you will find the eternal aims of the gods, knowing yourself in yourself. So now I'll read the whole verse again. In your thinking, worldwide thoughts are living. In your feeling, world all forces are weaving. In your willing, world beings are working. Lose yourself in worldwide thoughts. Feel thyself through world all forces. Create yourself from beings of will. Yet, do not linger in worlds afar. In dreamy play of thought, begin in the vast reaches of the spirit and end in your own being's depths. There you will find the eternal aims of the gods, knowing yourself in yourself. Very powerful words, very inspirational text. All right. Let's begin our journey for tonight. And perhaps strangely, I'd like to begin this evening by thanking you for giving me this opportunity and this challenge to bring this course, because it was in response to your requests to bring a course in inner work. And in teaching this, I have immersed myself in so much material to bring you the best quality work that I can. And I have learned so much myself and also come to wonderful points of self-reckoning. How much of this am I, how To what extent do I live in integrity? Just as I offer that to you, because I too might have moments when I think critical thoughts of someone else. And having refreshed these points of view with you, I know that that these thoughts destroy anyone, and so on. When I have my lack of will and when I have my really focused will. So it's been wonderful to take this journey with you. And I hope that you've gotten as much as I've gotten out of them. And so as we bring this to a close, I want to look again at the fact that Rudolf Steiner says we are all going through the threshold in our time. And there's this wonderful insight that we must come to terms with now, that we are all being initiated. Even more, the new initiation of our age happens in our everyday life. The new initiation of our age happens in our streets as we walk. The new initiation of our day happens at the marketplace in the way we deal with commerce. The new initiation of the day has to deal with how we deal with our shadows, our doubts, our fears, our aspirations, our values, all the way, of course, into how we deal with materialism, how we deal with technology, how we deal with our own inner demons. We are all being initiated. And this is something new in our age because we now live in the age of the consciousness soul. Thinking back, many of you are already familiar with this narrative about how humanity has evolved from what we call after Atlantis through ancient India. That was some 7,000 years before Christ, through ancient India and Persia, through the Egyptian, Chaldean, Hebraic time, through the Greek and Roman time, and then entering this current phase that we're in, going through the Middle Ages and so on until we now are in the consciousness soul age. And just think of these long times of history in which, step by step, the instrument for ourself was built. And then as long as we were still building the instrument with the help of the gods, we weren't called upon yet to have this conscious initiation. So to trace that again in the so-called ancient Indian time, and of course, the entire planet was going through this at that time, not just people who lived in what is now India, but all of us in that time were living through the stage of building the etheric body. It was not yet complete. It wasn't completely integrated with the human form. And what did initiation look like in that time? The initiation of that time was teaching people only bit by bit to look at this world, but really to be faithful to the spirit. And so there were these traditions of learning to perceive Krishna, learning to perceive the great gods, learning that there is where reality is, and this world is just Maya. We lived in the dreamy, etheric world still, appropriately. And then as humanity went through that phase, there came a next phase that we call the ancient Persian time of the great initiate Zarathustra, teaching about the true sun and the Maya image of the sun, which is the one that we see with our eyes. But the true sun has a different reality. What is behind the Maya that we see with our vision? So at that time, people were still looking into the other dimensions, but were also beginning to work with the earth. And the initiation of that time was learning how, bit by bit, to learn with the material world, and very especially through through battle, through combat, and also through working the soil, agriculture. And then we come to the Egyptian time, also with Babylonia and the Hebraic time in Chaldea. And there we have, as you probably have heard, the beginning of writing and merchantry and so on. But most especially, most famously, that's the time of the pyramids. And this time really was a time where humans were afraid of death. They could no longer sense or perceive what happens to a person when they die. What's on the other side of the threshold? Do people just disappear? And so their initiation, remember that's the thread we're following here, their initiation was such that the priests who held responsibility for the highest mysteries, they themselves had been taught through sacred mystery rituals, the priests. So there were long lineages of being taught spiritual realities, and then they would choose people in culture who showed signs of being incarnated in a particularly delicate body. They would say, you must leave your family and home. When the person was a child, leave your home, leave your family, come. You're going to have a lifetime as a priest, as an initiate. And they would choose the people who would be the temple candidates, the initiation candidates, and they would put them through long years of training, of fasting, of prayer, of service, and so on. And then they would put them into, when they were ready, they would have them enter into something like a trance state, what we call the temple sleep. And in this time, the priests would surround the body of the so-called candidate for initiation, the young person, and they would let that person, so to speak, die. They would let their bodies go away from the physical body. The priest would take responsibility for sending their own etheric forces into the body of the person lying in the temple sleep. And the person would go into trance state far away and for several days. And then they would come back, and the priests would arrange it in such a way that when the young person came back, they would, if everything went well, they would remember what they had perceived in the spiritual world. Hopefully, they would bring back prophecies, memories, messages for the culture. And in that way, the rituals of that time were trying to create, through managing the threshold, we're trying to create a way for people to go across the threshold, past the guarding of the threshold, and bring back insights and memories from the spiritual world. And the process of embalming the pharaohs had a lot to do with that, because they were trying to keep the pharaohs closer to the earth after they died through embalming. That's a whole question. What is embalming? It's trying to keep the etheric body closer to the earth so that the sacred knowledge that a pharaoh had would be cultivated and accessible on the earth through the pyramid rituals for a long time. And then, of course, we have at the same time the Hebrew religion, and we have monotheism, the different relationship. So the Egyptians, they knew about many, many gods, but with Hebrewism, there began the quest to find just one God and not a whole pantheism. So, and then we have the next age that we call the Greek and Roman time. And in that time, we had no longer the pyramids, especially in the late Greek time, but we had people beginning to have philosophical thoughts. It was a new thread. People were beginning to experience logical thinking. And nonetheless, in that logical thinking, they were trying to perceive the lawfulness of the gods. In Greece, Greco-Roman times, there were still the mystery temples. Young people were still brought to the temple and put through deep training at the service of the different gods or goddesses who were prayed to in the different temples, Zeus or Artemis or Aphrodite, whomever. There was a whole wealth of gods at that time in accordance with the different soul dispositions of people and their relationship to the planets. Once again, though, a rigid spiritual training taught by the priest, which was paralleled at the same time in India that was happening, a rigid spiritual teaching taught by the masters to the teachers. And then came the event of Christ, and we'll come to that this evening still. And then we look at what happened in those centuries after that, the early years of Christianity, when people could still feel the living presence of Christ. And that evolved into scholasticism. It evolved into monasteries, in many cases good, but a monastic person, a monastic life meant leaving the everyday life, withdrawing and being normally often renouncing any sexuality, renouncing the pleasures of life, sometimes even asceticism with beating oneself and harming the body. Sometimes it went into real tragic perversions of self-harm and sometimes harm of others. And there was a lot of mistakes, I believe, made in early Christian pursuits. And also, however, there were also very sacred streams in the thread of esoteric Christianity, including the mysteries of the Rose Cross, true Rosicrucianism, and also the Grail stream. And we'll talk more about that tonight. But now we're in our age, the age of the consciousness soul. And here it's the age when we are to be free. No longer do we go to the temples, the modern soul. No longer do we go to sit at the feet of the guru and pray and lose ourselves in ecstasy and admire what they might be exhibiting. In some cases, that might be appropriate for an individual, but not for the fully modern human being who needs to find their own, take responsibility for the evolution of their own I am being now in our time. And so the initiation happens to all of us in the course of our own biography. And we can think of, how do I live a life according to the sixfold exercises? How do I live a life according to Buddha's eightfold path without going to the temple? How do I discipline myself? How do I work on my virtues? And with all of that, and in the spirit of these webinars, we find great direction, great solace, great clarity and morality in the path of anthroposophy. And that's why I feel really inspired to name this course here, the Anthroposophical Path of Inner Work. Not just any path, but this path that Rudolf Steiner so boldly and freely gave to humanity, understanding it to be the modern esoteric path in which there's no compulsion at all. And so out of all the things that Rudolf Steiner tells and all the things that I've said to you, there is no exercise is required. Nothing is compelled. Everything is self-willed. And this is wonderful, empowering, and terrible. And it's especially terrible when we realize how much depends on us doing this. because we're no longer children. We are effectively in the 21st century after Christ, we're effectively 21 years old. We're effectively old enough to really give birth to our egos. And we have to take responsibility. We have to leave the old ways of being behind. In our age, it's radically new. And as I said, the initiations are now in our daily life. And let's just acknowledge how incredibly challenging our daily life is. And here, as I've indicated before, even if I've indicated it lightly, but I keep pointing to the Archangel Michael, this great spiritual being who is the spirit of our time, who is part of supporting in us, even more than supporting, helping to guide us in the path of being able to think. This only if we can think spiritually can we become free human beings in the consciousness soul. So we have to struggle for our thoughts. We have to work for them. But most importantly, we have to realize that we need to understand our process of thinking. Understand it not physiologically. And I encourage you always to resist that thought that comes up in contemporary conversation and in common assertions, and even in your own brain. The common thought that says, my brain is thinking this. My brain makes me do this. What's going on in my brain? It's not your brain. The brain reflects your thinking. But in this age of spiritual awakeness, we need to recognize what we are doing as we look for thoughts. What is consciousness? Now pay attention to this thought here. Rudolf Steiner, as you know, has laid out this spiritual path as a path of thinking and consciousness. Feeling and willing are also very important, but the eye of the needle for us to go through is our consciousness, our awakening, our consciousness soul. And in that, we are operating in a deed, in a faculty that is beyond what happens in the purely physical world. And so Rudolf Steiner gives us this thought. It's a little tricky, but try to find it. He says, look at the whole world. Look at the majesty of the sun and the earth and nature and trees and animals. Look at all of that. Even look at, your form from the outside. Learn from it. See what that is, but know that that is not your true being. No, nowhere there in the world will you find what you really are. You only find what you really are when you can grasp the activity of your spiritual activity inside your life. And he says, as soon as we can do that, we get to a core nature of being and becoming, living in time, living in spirit within this world that has been manifest. And I'm so happy to bring you that thought, to try to put it into words and say, each one of us has to think that thought again and again and again. Because just as I have given it to you now, and you think, wait, how do I do that? I have to think, I have to watch my thinking to know that I'm not the same as that can lead you into some thought knots until you recognize, oh, now I get it. Now I know that I am working out my self-evolution. And in my experience, I've had these I ams again and again. But if I'm not conscious of myself as a meditant, as I walk through life, if I forget as I walk through my life that I'm a meditant, then I become a passive thinker. It takes effort to know, to place my sense of being at a more essential place, but we all can do it. And when we're doing that, and we walk this path of initiation as we walk the streets of our life, we become different beings. And when we don't do that, what happens? We're surrounded by the world of technology. We're surrounded by the world of materialism. And what is that? That's nothing but a world in which the spiritual life has been crystallized, has been shaped, but is itself devoid of spirit. But with our consciousness, we have to recognize the spirit that has brought this whole world into being. It's the same world that we access through our consciousness, the whole spiritual world all around us. And essentially, we realize that we are all, that the essence of all things in the world is being, our beings, spiritual beings. You are a spiritual being. The angels are spiritual beings who don't have bodies. Thoughts are spiritual beings. Love are spiritual beings. The only real thing in the universe are spiritual beings, and all the rest of the things are things, which are, as we understand through anthroposophy, materialized or frozen spirit. And those are thoughts that we can only discover if we're inwardly active. So all the shocks of destiny are trying to wake us up. And we're all trying to be initiated. And if we don't, as I said last week, we stand really as the plaything between Lucifer and Ahriman. Too much ecstasy and too much scleroticism. And we need to, I can't even say we need to, but I choose to look always for the middle way, the way of being spiritually awake and active in my life. And we must all sculpt our own journey. And what gets in our way? Our sleep, our passivity, and our love of comfort. Our love of comfort, our laziness. Actually, that's a statement that Riddle Steiner said. I read it many decades ago, and it's never left me. The greatest obstacle to our spiritual growth is our love of comfort. So as students of anthroposophy, we are all familiar with the concept of life after death. And perhaps I can never assume that all of you have accepted that or come to terms with that as a core perspective, but we really have a deeper understanding of our destiny if we can entertain the thought that we are on this long journey through many lifetimes, evolving our consciousness. We probably were all personally there in Egypt. In all of these phases, Riddle Steiner says, in general, we've each had two incarnations, once as a man and once as a woman in each of these cultural ages. There are, of course, exceptions and individual variations, but we've all been here before, each time evolving new capacities in our essential being. And those of us, those who I'm talking to now, you are here because this is your time, once again, to go through the eye of the needle. And you're here to experience the birth of your ego in this Michael age. and come to terms, to awaken. And in that, we can commit ourselves to doing this path. And this, as I've told you on many occasions here, it's so important to do this now. We won't have another chance like this chance. This is not like our last lifetime. This is not like the last century. This is not like the pre-industrial age. This is the age in which we have a completely new relationship to the earth. We've got to get to the core of it. And Anthroposophy stands with us as a great teacher. So in the path, the journey of initiation, self-initiation or temple initiation in the olden days, the student for initiation, for spiritual growth, is given different trials. And the trials that were given are described by Rudolf Steiner, especially in the book Knowledge of Higher Worlds. But he speaks about a fire trial, and next a water trial, and then an air trial. He speaks of 3. Surely there are more, but he describes these in some depth. And he says the first trial that a person will meet is the fire trial. Then he goes on to clarify and says, well, actually, you might meet the water or the air first or at a different time, but there are lessons to learn in each of them. The fire trial is a trial in which you are sorely challenged by life. It could be through sickness. It could be through a tragedy. Your house burns down. Could be a grievous accident. Something outside of you that takes you to the possible depths of despair. And your job, my job, the student's job is to find the essential lessons to be learned in that trial. And actually, we can be so glad when we stand in those fire trials, and we probably get more than one of them in a lifetime, but we can be so glad for them, because if we live through a fire trial rightly, we will really be rudely and powerfully awakened. Wake up, come to terms with, pay attention to the essentials. That's the fire trial. Do you stand for just being a machine, or will you work out of your essences? But then a person will be challenged in other ways. And that the next one that he calls the water challenge is not just something that comes out of the blue, but it's when we are called upon to really read our situation and recognize, actually, I need to do something very different here from what I would do if I weren't spiritually striving. I recognize through what I'm reading in my environment, in my social situation, in my spiritual situation, I have the student, the awake person will say, I can tell that I cannot look at the situation here and just work here out of the surfaces. I feel like I have the growing certainty that I'm reading certain messages accurately, certain phenomena in this situation, and I can see if I do this or that I will be able to change the course of my community, or the course of my life, or the course of, I don't know, politics, or my ecosystem. Learning how to read what's going on and know what to do in that situation because of a different and finer level of perception. And he especially talks about that for a person who is growing these inner imaginative and intuitive capacities. But we all get that on a subtle level. And surely you understand by this, to rightfully negotiate these paths, we have to have certainty for knowing who Lucifer and Ahriman are. right? We have to know who the adversaries are because there's a possibility of great mistakes at that time. But it's part of our standing at the threshold, and we will all meet things like that. And then he says the air trial is even more difficult because then there's nothing more for us to read. Out of a pure inner sense of inner morality and insight, we choose a deed. We know, we find, we feel, we perceive a deed that must come, that we will to create out of our own essence. By doing that, we inscribe our essence upon the destiny of our time, even if it's a small way, the destiny of our family or the destiny of something bigger, but we create something new. And if we create it out of morality and love that we've developed by our own spiritual work, we really inscribe ourselves upon the world. So these are the trials that everyone was given in the initiation temples, the schools of old. And now the new initiations are on the street, in your life, in your family, at your workplace, on the marketplace. We're all doing that. And as we do that, we're surrounded by our helpful spiritual guides, our angels, the spirit of our time, Michael, but also by elemental beings, hopefully very good ones, the ones who make nature work, also ones that are tormented, those who are suffering the abuses of our abuse of the ecosystem, and those who are stuck in machines and not acknowledged, and therefore they become more resentful. There's many things that are happening in our world that we don't always pay attention to. And then there are also the big guys, Lucifer and Ahriman and their beings. And we need to learn not all beings are well disposed to us. And so in our work, we must work on aligning ourselves. And essentially, it's our task to recognize Lucifer and Ahriman, to recognize that the adversaries and redeem them to the extent that we choose deeds of loving goodness in freedom, and they don't need to do what they're doing anymore because we will have become our free conscious beings. So in studying reincarnation and knowing that we're on this path of evolution, of course, we have heard about karma. And karma is this lawfulness that whatever I do will have its repercussions in the world. And I have to meet the results of what I have done again and again. On a very simple level, if I pick something up and move it somewhere else, I'm responsible for where it is now. If I plant a tree, that tree has grown out of my will. Those are simple examples, but I have put something into the world and I have started a chain of cause and effect. In the sense of, for instance, Rudolf Steiner's life, he founded all of Anthroposophy, and he said he is karmically indebted to every person who reads Anthroposophy. So a teacher like that is responsible for the repercussions of what they do. Just like the executive of a company is responsible for all of the repercussions of their decisions into the home life of someone who gets fired and no longer to take care of their children or so on. We are bound in a web of destiny. And so when we say our karma meets us in our lifetime, I don't know if I have given you enough parts of this puzzle to understand this, but essentially, I'm always saying we live inside our hearts, but that's not the only way to understand how we live. We also live unconsciously beyond our bodies, meaning I live in you wherever you are, and you live in me. But when I meet you, I'm actually meeting what I have done with you in the past. You bring to me, the people whom you meet bring you your karma. They bring you your karma. And as I mentioned last week, the spiritual beings of the world have to do a lot of work to bring us together to fulfill our karma. So I'm pointing here to this process that essentially we get turned inside out after we die. And when we come back into life, we meet what we had turned ourselves inside out and imprinted on the universe. Yeah. And Rudolf Steiner tells us we have all made our own karma. But then he also says there are different levels of karma. And we touched on this last week when I talked about forgiveness and what a gift we have to other people if we're able to forgive them, but also to the spiritual world if we forgive. And here I'd like to just point out, Rudolf Steiner says there are three kinds of karma. There is the karma of the past. He calls that, I will bring in the words about the Father God, the Son God, the Christ God, and the Holy New God. So stick with me here for a second. Old karma, what we call Saturn karma, old karma is something that you've set up in the past and something that has got to come back to you again. Has to happen. That's what we would call Father God karma. And now Rudolf Steiner, in his talking about Christ, which I'll speak about a little bit more in a few minutes, says Christ, as the being of love who became a human being, the creator God, Christ is now the new Lord of karma. Big thought. Christ is the Lord of karma. And this works for someone who has discovered what and who Christ really is, esoterically. That's why I'll come back to that in a minute. But he says what Christ does is give us the chance of evolving and becoming servants of the whole of humanity in building a new future, building future Jupiter, future Venus, and so on. Christ is the prototype of the new humanity. And if we have a karmic debt with someone, we're obliged to fulfill it in father karma, in old karma, and Saturn karma. But if we have made a relationship, a living relationship to the God of love and light and life, the Christ spirit who overcomes death, if we have found this presencing in our own biography, in our hearts, then we live in the sphere of karma in a different way. Christ still serves the necessity of karma that we have to be in relationship to every deed that we've done, but it could be in community that we can atone for each other's karma. So if someone else has done a bad deed, I can take that up for them out of love. And in doing that, I can create deeds that will atone for that person's karma out of love. And that means that the whole cause and effect of the universe comes into a different kind of balance, so that our deeds resound to serve the greater good of everyone. So he doesn't have to necessarily be punished for doing a bad deed. If I get involved rightfully and bring healing into that situation, the deed has to be atoned for, has to be balanced out, but a community can carry someone else's karma, so that through Christ, who loves all of humanity, we're all working towards the evolution for the greater good of humanity. And there is one other kind of karma that we can understand, and that is entering a situation that is completely new, for which there was no previous cause. And I'm thinking here of someone who goes through the air trial, as I mentioned before, someone who does a deed out of their own inner integrity. This is lovingly what I will to put into the world. Not out of cause and effect, associative thinking, not out of my childhood and all this, but this is new. And I think thereof, for instance, someone like, someone like Rudolf Steiner, yes. Someone like Nelson Mandela, maybe. Martin Luther King Jr., someone who has really put something completely new into the world because they saw that it needed to be done. That is a whole new kind of karmic unfolding. That is a gift that humanity makes to the spiritual world, a gift to the future of the world. And so in this moment, who is Christ? And dear friends, I'm always very, very careful to bring that into these evening talks, because my own understanding of Christ has evolved completely since I came to understand anthroposophy. And as I've walked my own path of development, evolution, suffering, healing, growth, all of that, my understanding of Christ is a different one than what I had as a child. And I would never want to give you a picture of Christ which is too superficially related to another picture you might have had from another stage in your life, or related to all of the terrible, terrible shadows and evil shadows that have been done in the name of Christ in the world. That's not it. When power has taken hold of Christianity, it goes south. But the biggest question you can ask, what would it mean? What does it mean in your own struggle to understand Christ? What would it mean if God became a human being and died and overcame death? And as I live with that thought and say, well, is it true? Is that what Christ did? And I have grown to understand that the God has not left us alone. God has, through the man Jesus, God as Christ has become a human being like that, woven himself into a body. Even though we're on this remote outpost of the universe, God has lived here in a body, physical, etheric, astral ego, has eaten and felt hunger and so on, suffered and died. And here is the essential thing. In dying, God, as man, continued to say, I am. I forgive. I am. I am. Death cannot destroy the essence of humanness. I give that as my gift to humanity, to everyone, by virtue of having lived in a body and resurrecting it. Christ has created the path for all of us to connect to this resurrection body. It's everywhere in the etheric environment of the world. It's here. It's accessible in our hearts, accessible in the life spaces of the world, not there where the technology or when excessive materialism tries to assert that that's all that there is, but there where love for God, love for life, commitment to spirit is, whatever your religion, but wherever those commitments to love and life and light are, there we can find God has become human. And this is the redemption of the physical body, the redemption of the physical world, so that this, what happened to humanity through becoming material, can be overcome, and we can move into the future. And through that, this archetype of love and of what the human being is becoming is now a reality. So we can all find our own paths towards spirit. It really doesn't matter which religious path you have, but understanding the spirit of love and life and light is central in every path. That Christ lives wherever love is. And now, in the anthroposophical path of inner work, we can be very clear that there's no expectation that anyone choose to live out a religious or a need to go to churches. There's no expectation of that. However, there can be real spiritual nourishment by going to a rightful religious service and taking communion, finding a relationship to the community of people who are committed to this path of, again, love and light. And anthroposophy and religion come together in a beautiful harmony. But Rudolf Steiner's own path was to bring the knowledge path, the thinking path, and he left the religious path free, not because he was opposed to it, but because it wasn't his path to appeal to our emotions or to bring that kind of nourishment. We need to be free to find it ourselves. But he did, upon the request of a number of priests, Rudolf Steiner created, and here I don't even have a word for it, he brought in a new mass, if you will, which is called the Christian Community Service, the movement for religious renewal, which is a beautiful work. And if any of you have questions about that, you can look that up online, called the Christian Community or the Movement for Religious Renewal. Beautiful work. And there are these churches in many places around the world. But you're free. It's not an expectation. What is expected from this class that I've been doing with you is that you become the sculptor of your own journey. So let's remember what we have. The path begins with reverence and devotion. Always. Gratitude. Commitment to take care of this biography and this instrument you have, to be healthy in body, soul, and spirit to fulfill what you have to do in your daily life, your duties, but also feel gratitude and pleasure in what you have. A huge doorway is available to us in observing the sense world. But in doing so, don't take it in passively. Learn to become aware of how your senses are doorways to the world and perceive how everything is affecting you. Listen to the after effects of bird song and how it's a different after effect if it's synthetic music. Listen to the after effects of deeds, of things that you look at, the after effects of a rainbow or a cloudy day. How do they live in you? Any one of those impressions can be seed for a meditation. And if you don't have time for that all the time. But as you walk through life, ideally you walk through life always conscious that you're on your path of initiation. Even as you laugh and play, but you're also aligned with the morality of being responsible for who you are. And in doing that, you evolve, take responsibility for how you think, for how you speak. Stay committed. Discipline helps. Discipline your will. Don't let your will separate off from your thinking and feeling and do things where you're not showing up. Discipline your will. Rhythm, a rhythmical life helps. The study of anthroposophy is an enormous help, an enormous help to our inner work. And notice, you can ask as you study. I feel confident if I read Anthroposophy that my teacher's really good. He's steadfast moral. But if I read someone else, always, who is really speaking here? Whose teaching is this? Meaning Lucifer or Ahriman, or a really aligned being, a teacher who's aligned to love and light and love in whatever spiritual stream that is. But who learn to be discerning. And I want to bring this picture. In his book Occult Science, An Outline to Esoteric Science, Rudolf Steiner says, the work of anthroposophy is the work of the Grail, the Holy Grail, this ancient path or very old path of esoteric wisdom that understands the importance of making a cup of knowledge, a cup whereby we allow this love and light and love to permeate our consciousness, permeate our hearts, to permeate our whole being. In our age, anthroposophy is the new Christian esotericism, in the very best sense of the word, the new esotericism of the consciousness soul, so that we become chalices, the vessel to be able to hear what the spirit is. In the path of anthroposophy, there are different kinds of spiritual, esoteric initiatives. And so in anthroposophy, just to touch this at the end as I bring this to a close, Rudolf Steiner, in the last years of his life, had a whole new thrust for how to do his level best, how to bring anthroposophy into the world so that essentially there will be enough people who are taking this path forward right through the middle of this jungle of materialism. And so Riddle Steiner founded the Anthroposophical Society, hoping to make a welcoming home to everyone who feels drawn to this work. And there's no creed, no membership vow, nothing. But there's a meditation that all members of the society share called the Foundation Stone Meditation. And you can find this meditation pretty easily online. It's not in that sense at all secret, but it is the speaking of the human spirit who says, I know that I was born out of God, with many, many words. I'm just giving you a few key words. I know that I was born out of God. I know that I live in Christ. I know that the Spirit lives in all things and that I can learn to perceive that. These are the words. It's about a 30-line poem or so, or meditation. But these are all so important because they unite all people who are trying to work in anthroposophy to find our alignment here. And then going deeper, if a person really makes a commitment to anthroposophy, you might choose to join what's called the first class in anthroposophy, which is a much more focused commitment to do regular meditations that describe to us what it is to go to the threshold of the spiritual world and go across the threshold and meet the guardian and Lucifer and Christ and Ahriman, and what it takes to do that journey. That's an esoteric path, and one is not encouraged to take that up prematurely, but it is for people who have really discovered that they want to go deeper into this path. That is there. There's also a path within anthroposophy for those who feel they want to do the work of building a community in togetherness with the Archangel Michael. And this is another shared meditation of those who are students who, in a sense, remember, before I was born, I made a commitment to be in alignment with Michael as the countenance of Christ, the spirit of our age. All right. With that, I'm going to bring this talk to an end. I gave you a commitment that I would like to listen to your questions. We'll see if you have them, maybe not. But I did make a commitment that if you brought questions to this evening, I would answer them. But I have certainly unfolded deep chapters in tonight's talk. And I very much want to thank you for being part of this. As you know, this is the last class. Next week, I won't be doing any more classes. And then starting the week of November 29th, November 28th, which begins the season of Advent, we'll have 4 weeks of Eurythmy and 4 weeks of evening classes. And the announcements of registration for both of those are open. I do hope you'll join. We're going to have some beautiful sacred poetry and some deep thoughts about the process of birth. Who was the child of humanity, and who was the Sacred Mother Mary? Who were they? What is this mystery of the birth in the darkness? So those are the journeys that we'll be on. I hope you'll be with me. And as I've told you before, I will be traveling in January. I'll be doing workshops in Spring Valley, New York, and possibly also in Chicago. We're waiting for that to happen. And I guess one more thing, spread the word. Spread the word, share the announcements for these workshops, share them with your friends, share them with your community, and bring more people to the sacred work that we're doing together. Thank you so much, and thank you, Michelle. And now, do we have any questions here, Michelle?
Well, at the moment, we don't, but I think the fact that you just opened up that invitation, yes, lots of words of appreciation and yes.
Yes, thank yous. Works for me. I think, how can one ask questions after all of that, right?
Okay, Judy asked, how does union?
Maybe that means how do you join? How do you join?
Yes, how do you join the first class?
Yeah. So to join the first class, first of all, you need to be a member of the society. So it's actually not accessible to people who don't live in a place where there's a society, although you can be. You can be a member of the Anthroposophical Society from anywhere in the world. But if you live in a city where there is a meeting of the Anthroposophical Society, you should join the group in your area. But you can be a member at large. And that's a prerequisite. In tradition, the way that Rudolf Steiner wanted it in his time, a person should be a member of the society for 2 years before they apply for membership in the first class, essentially to be sure that that person has really tested their own resolve to do the inner work. Things have changed now. I don't know if that's for better or worse, but in some cases, one joins the first class really much more quickly. Maybe that's in an awareness that people are evolving differently in our time. But in some cases, you can join more quickly. In general, you join by meeting the so-called first class reader in your community. So I know the person in my community. I would go to them and say, I'd like to join. I would have a number of conversations with that person. And then I would write a letter, and then I would be admitted and start going to the lessons. It's also possible now to find the first class meditations online, and I find that very questionable because they were, when Steiner gave them, it was fully out of intention that the sacredness of their words be protected by only being shared in an oral transmission and not being read in a book, because they are supposed to belong to community. If you really wanted to, you could find them online. But you might, if you know that it's not actually the original intention, maybe you'll find a different way by joining a group. Thank you so much, and blessings to all of you. Be back soon.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And Michelle, thank you as always.
You are welcome.
Bye for now.